Hello and welcome to the Argyle CFO Summit. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, Divvy and Vertex. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum. Also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would also like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we truly appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we would love to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Sumita Seni, Senior Vice President of Enterprise FP&A and Commercial Finance at Bed Bath & Beyond. We are excited to have Sumita for her opening keynote titled Successfully Streamlining the Budgeting and Planning Process. Welcome, Sumita, and over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. The last few years has been quite the challenge for all of us in finance. I think budgeting and planning has taken on a whole new meaning. So with that, let's dive right into it. So as we kind of look at, what is the need today? So Brittany, if you could just move to the next slide. The need to have a streamlined process for budgeting and planning is probably at its heightened, space ever. The pandemic has been just a blur of just employee safety, the economic shocks, and even the current macro environment, making it so critical to have a streamlined process so that we can then focus on the business decision making versus constantly being in a planning cycle. So the usual business as usual budgeting processes that we were probably used to pre-pandemic is no longer working for us. In fact, about 43% of the CFO respondents in a McKinsey survey, cited the need that they needed to streamline the overall budgeting process so that we can react more quickly and more efficiently. And I'm sure all of you are nodding your heads out there. That kind of transitions right into, how do we look further out into the future? So 65% of the CFOs also anticipate using more of the rolling forecasts in 2020, 2022 and beyond. Not an easy task, but we're just still trying to recover from, the current, forecasting process, budgeting process, and making sure it's streamlined and faster than it was before. And so what does that mean? The current turbulence, we have a lot going on. We have inflation at an all-time high. We have, global economic uncertainty. We have a war. So there's a lot going on in the world, in the macro environment, which just means that, whatever budget we put together is going to be old the moment we close the books and hit final budget version 43 or whatever you might have. It just means that we have to really pivot to, speed of the budgeting process and cost controls, because we're facing this headwind of inflation. And so, the typical budget process, as each and every one of us has probably gone through, it's stuck in this constant, endless negotiations. And, everyone's so focused on their cost center budgets and what they need to deliver that very often, it's easy for us in finance to kind of lose track of how does this fit into the overall strategy and the value creation and the resource allocation needed to for us to, address and successfully get to our strategy. So basically, we just need to go to a radically redesigned and reimagined process. And I hope to share my thoughts with you on how we can unlock more value in the budgeting process. So the next slide kind of takes us through what, through my years in FP&A, I've, gone through, tripped on certain areas. Certain sections have been very successful. So I'm hoping to share with you here today how I envision and what I've put in place here at Bed Bath & Beyond, what is closer to what is working for us in this very turbulent times. Retail right now is probably under more pressure than many other industries. And so I wanted to share with you the 3-step process that we've embarked on and this journey towards streamlining the budgeting process. The first one is integrated business planning. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on that and what does that mean, and are you ready for integrated business planning? Because not all companies can successfully implement integrated business planning. 2, how do we use the budgeting process to focus on the business drivers so that we're more focused on the strategy and the assumptions versus just the numbers? And then how do we use standardization to enable us to get there quicker and faster? And then obviously the third one, the most important one, is how do you drive accountability through this, right? Because how many times have we heard, that's not my plan, that's not my budget. So how do we drive that accountability through the evaluation of results versus budget? And how does finance become a key trusted advisor through this budgeting process? So on the next slide, we'll start with integrated business planning. So let's start with step 1. Moving along to the next slide here, as we look at what does integrated business planning mean? So for those of you who have a strong S&OP process, the sales and operations planning process, it would really behoove you to kind of extend the principles of that to integrated business planning, or also known as IBP. We in finance like to use our acronyms, so IBP and S&OP. Essentially, IBP, extends out the S&OP process, and it creates that bridge between strategy and execution. S&OP, as we all know, is a little limited to the business functions. They speak their own language. They have their own KPIs. How do you then integrate the S&OP, the finance function, into the S&OP so that you then have a more robust forecasting process? And the discipline and the monthly process is so critical, and that's kind of one of the tenets of integrated business planning, is the rigor around the timeline and the discipline of submissions, the consolidation, and then bringing back to the table what does it mean to our business go forward. Because essentially what you're doing is you're providing a lens into the future through this monthly forecasting process, which is the integrated business planning extended out into a more frequent process. And it really has to sit on top of a cross-functional approach. It has to be aligned with the business strategy. You have to lock arms with your key leadership teams. And what it essentially does is the S&OP process focuses more on the volume planning and how we're going to achieve the volumes and what are the steps in the process to kind of, move towards the value planning. So it kind of moves from volume planning to both incorporating the volume planning and the value planning, which kind of ties back into are you on track to accomplish and achieve your strategy. So then moving along to the next slide here, let's look at how do you weave this across the functional areas? As we said earlier, the integrated business planning is a cross-functional task. And so what I have here on the screen is just a visual of how this is a cycle and how do you kind of integrate all different plans. And for those of you not in retail, feel free to kind of replace these sections with kind of what's unique to your business. So it starts with really setting high-level business targets. So finance provides an overall guidance, whether it's on store labor for us in retail, what's your marketing spend, and what's your SG&A, your FTE, your headcount, based on current business conditions. As we all know, the business conditions have been rapidly, changing direction. And so I think, it's a little bit of a bottoms up and tops down approach to allow for speed of the process in this integrated business planning. And then you have your merch planning or your sales drivers, which really kind of look at your category plans, your plans by vendor, by customer, and your marketing events, your coupons, your loyalty program, what's happening with your supply chain, what's happening with your freight. Thankfully, supply chain seems to be stabilizing just a little bit more this year than what we've all experienced in the last couple of years. And so, how do we take the inputs from all of this commercial planning activities and build that and weave that into your financial forecast? And so when finance then consolidates this, not in isolation, but in conversations with each and every functional area, understanding all of the drivers. So very important to note that, it's not just a line on the P&L, but it's the driver-based planning. And so we roll that up, and then you have a forecast, a line of sight into what the next quarter looks like, what the full year and the second half could potentially look like, and calls out really what are your risks and opportunities through this consolidation. And you dust it off, and you finalize the forecast, you put it aside, and the next month when you have the actuals, it's so key to do the hindsight analysis. So you look at your actuals versus budget, which I know we all do, but how do you take the the comprehensive review to really inform your future forecast? So that's again, then going back into your monthly cycle, right? Because you do your hindsight analysis, and then it leads you right back into your business targets that you might have to set to level set, whether it's okay to allow for more investments back into the business, or maybe time out, we need to pull back based on what's happening in the macro world and what's unique to our business. So then, so that then leads you into my next slide is scenario planning. I talked about the turbulence in our current macro environment. And I think one of the things that we in finance are hopefully quickly incorporating into our processes and budgeting and planning is scenario planning. I cannot emphasize how important it is today to have an ABC and what are the impacts of ABC on when you do your scenario planning. So, you start with your inputs. So you have, your various business drivers. So you take your inputs, whether it's your marketing events, what's your return on your ad spend, what's your traffic, your loyalty programs, consumer insights, what's happening out there. You take all of those insights and you build out what we call here at Bedback our merch forecast. It's one view of our world. And then because we are actively looking at scenario planning, we do what we call as a corporate forecast. So we look at, we pressure test the merch forecast or the business forecast. We pressure test that commercial planning to say, does it look like it's achievable? Is there risk or is there opportunity? And you might remember that from my earlier wheel where we had the overall roll up calling out the risks and opportunities. And so that kind of provides you your low, mid, and in normal times, you should really have a low, mid, and a high. So you have your range of scenario planning. And so you kind of then decide with your senior leadership on what is the forecast that you are going to level set on. You have your forecast review, you review the forecast scenarios, as I mentioned, finalize forecast, and then you go into the monthly hindsight analysis. Again, just a little bit more detail from the wheel that I shared with you earlier. One of the other very critical components of integrated business planning, if you move to the next slide, Brittany, is the calendar and deliverables alignment. I cannot tell you how many times I am in meetings and people are not aware of when the forecast is due, and then finance scrambles to put together a forecast that may not have full alignment with the leadership teams of those functional areas. So, this is just a mock, that feel free to kind of adopt it to your particular instance, but you really start at a very high level. You have your long range plan, then you have your annual budget, and then you have your quarterly type deliverables, and then at the very bottom of the page you kind of show what your monthly cadence is. So we take this information, and then this one has a very detailed calendar, a RACI really, that really defines the roles, the accountability of different departments, and what are they really bringing to the table. So the calendar, deliverables, and alignment is so critical to delivering a successful integrated business planning. I will also say that, IBP is an extension of the SNOP process, and I think I mentioned that very early in the in the presentation. So Brittany, if you can just go to the next slide here. We could kind of hit on what are the challenges of IBP, because it's an extension of the SNOP process. If your company does not have an SNOP process that has been implemented, or one that is a little iffy, it's not stable, then IBP is too big of a step. I have been at companies where I've tried to implement an IBP, and it hasn't been as successful to where you see best practices because it was based on an SNOP that was still in its infancy. So you really need a strong SNOP process where all of the key managers know and understand what they're bringing to the table. And then integrating finance definitely requires the right talent and the business alignment on KPIs. As I mentioned earlier, the business functions tend to speak a little different language. They have a different KPI. How do you take those KPIs and make sure our finance partners, our teams understand what that is, and you're providing them with the resources, the education, the training, the right mindset. Not everyone's built for FP&A, so because it does require that unique mindset and attitude where you're not just connecting the dots, but you're also able to challenge your leadership team on something that may not seem right when you're pulling in the driver-based planning. Also, sometimes targets and forecasts get mixed because this is a monthly forecast process, and there's a target that the different business functions are shooting towards. It can create a little bit of confusion. So it's it's a little bit of an education there. Also, very quickly, it dives into usually the discussion about numbers. We do have to stay focused on what are the underlying assumptions, and we'll go into that into my next section in a bit. But how do you then also not just focus on the short term, so not just what actuals versus forecast were for the prior month in the functional area, but also kind of use that information to drive the conversation into what does it mean for the next quarter and the quarter after. And sometimes it just goes into too granular plans and discussions. Also, I have seen that if we don't have a thorough understanding of the trade-offs, then it can create a little bit of a challenge in rolling out the IBP process. With that, we'll move into the next section, step 2, which is very key to a successful streamlined budgeting and planning process. Focus on business drivers and standardization. So that is so key. As we move into the next slide, you will see that as you have to reimagine the business. So focusing on the business drivers almost automatically takes you to reimagining the business through zero-based budgets, or also known as ZBB. I know from my past life, and there are numerous studies that have been done on zero-based budgets, which, while very painful, because we in finance, I think, take the brunt of building the templates out and then walking our business partners through this, is literally questioning every single dollar in your budget. It just literally means you start with zero. So it's not based on what you spent last year or what the trend is. It's based on more. You start with an expense base of zero. You start with sales base of zero. How do you then come back and say, how do you build your sales, whether it's by customer or whether it's by category, and really build your bottoms up budget? And the most painful one that I think I get, and I think most grief on, is travel and entertainment. Can you, so my finance team will go out and say, here's your template. Can you please give me your T&E budget for rest of the year? And please, oh, by the way, list for me who's going to be traveling. And it's an auto-populated file that all they have to do is pop in the month and where they're traveling and the name of the traveler, and it just automatically populates your dollars. But that's the one that I think I get the most pushback on. It's like, oh, I don't know. And so again, it's coming back to zero-based budgets. Most times you'll find that your leadership team and your business unit owners know where they're spending on professional fees, consulting fees, because those are the big buckets. T&E is literally, I spent 50,000 last year, I spent $1 million last year, and I expect to spend on the same cadence. So it's really reimagining the business. It's, moving them towards these zero-based budgets. We talked about scenario planning earlier, so I won't go into that again here, but scenario planning is also critical as you kind of look at your business drivers. And you have to, as you think about the current turbulent times we are in, I think we in finance recognize that we have to hold back a cushion. We have to hold back some spending as a contingency so that we can have some optionality in our budgets. And we really have to rethink the decision making. We talked about it earlier where we have this negotiations. We don't have the time for that. So how do we use the data to really rethink decision making and speed up the process and really take the bias out of these processes and this decision making? Standardization, we'll dive into that a little bit more, is so key to the speed in which we are able to implement and streamline budgeting and process planning. So then moving along to the next page here, focusing on our business drivers. We talked about that driver-based planning is really key to successful planning. And really the goal here is to identify those few metrics and concentrate on those factors that are most critical to the success of the company. And then how do you take now those drivers and build out a financial model, build out this model that really enables the business manager to play with the numbers, do some scenario planning, and have those aha moments. Oh, if I did this to traffic, look what it does to my sales. So you need to have those iterative type business financial models that finance can partner with the business owner. And hence, by doing that, you're automatically also aligning yourself to become like their trusted advisor, where they come back to you and they will, be more aligned with you on the forecasting process. And, basically all of this, when you focus on this and you have your model, it allows organizations to run faster budget iterations. I mentioned version 43 earlier on, final. I know we've all been there. It feels like we're constantly budgeting and planning, but the more we are able to compress the time frame, the more time we make for ourselves to do the more value-added activities, such as the analysis, being that business advisor to the business owners. And then the next one is on the next slide, talks about the other component of success in this step 2, which is standardizing the data and processes. So we've all been there. Manual error, we've all experienced that, is the biggest culprit. You have a fat-fingered number in an Excel spreadsheet. So how do you standardize these templates? Use one single consolidated method of data collection to really streamline this process, consolidate it. We all gravitate to Excel. It's normal. I think we all do that. But how do we kind of use a cloud-based solution to simplify this so there's one version of truth and simplify it as much as possible? Lastly, I think we all look at have allocations in our business. I've seen so many businesses trip up on those allocation methodologies where it takes forever to actually, build those allocations and implement the allocations, forecast those dollars based on those allocations, streamline them, make it repeatable, make it automated so that you're spending little time as possible on that, and then really refine the frequency and the level of detail. Because we all know that as soon as we dust off and we, say final version 43, it's already an outdated process. So with that, we'll move on to step 3. Step 3 is driving the accountability. How do you drive accountability through evaluation of the results versus budget? This is where it gets a little tricky. So as you look at my next slide here, how many of you have probably heard, it's not my plan, finance did that. And I think this is where we need to drive the ownership. And I will say that, sometimes we do it to ourselves. We in finance will make those last minute changes. We're scrambling for time. We don't always close that loop back with our business partners. So I think it's twofold: to stop "it's not my plan" comments, make sure we make the time to close that loop, and really make the cost center owners accountable for their own budgets. By making them a part of the process, having them input the dollars into the templates that we have educated them on, give them the right tools and templates and access to the data so that they can be in a self-serve mode versus waiting on finance to send them a report and then the back and forth, so that they have the confidence then to make those data-driven decisions. This is so key in the entire streamlining and success of a budgeting and planning process. And I'm sure many of you out there can relate to that. And then lastly is clear direction and guidance when you do share that final budget, so that it's closing that loop, making sure if there were any changes in assumptions and business drivers, that your business partners are aware of that. So that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation, and I'll hand it over back to Brittany.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sumita, for such an insightful keynote. As a reminder, audience members can still enter questions, but Sumita, we'll go ahead and review a few that came through. This first question asks, how are companies with smaller staff adapting to the remote or hybrid environment?
That's a really good question. I think all of us are still trying to figure out what that is, going from, a 3-day in the office to 4 days in the office. We in finance, I think, tend to find ourselves more in the office. And I think that does create that challenge of how do you reach out to your business partners and align with them. I think planning, being planful about the calendar is key to adapting to that hybrid model, so that everyone, yourself, including our business partners, understand the calendar of deliverables and the timeline, and you follow up. So don't assume that your business partner has seen your email and is ready with the deliverable on when you needed it. So you have to go into a little bit of chase mode with we in FP&A and finance just have to do that with a smile and not take it personally when they dismiss us. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great, thank you so much. This next question, what do you recommend for smaller companies and startups that have limited resources?
Great question. I would say with limited resources, I think you want to make sure that the standardization of templates exists. And that means that you're always reviewing the same information in the same format every month. Through my years in experience, I have found that when you move to a standardized templates, and don't underestimate the power of visuals and color coding in your spreadsheets, you train the brain, you train your business partners. So the more you can standardize your templates, make sure it always looks the same, make sure your decks always flow in the same order, you will eliminate confusion, you'll be able to speak to it more with more authority. And most importantly, your business partners will understand the numbers. Remember, your business partners are in the business of running the business, making sure the business is successful. So it's our job to make it as easy as possible for them.
Excellent, thank you. This next question, what is the best way to get people who are not in FP&A invested in the process?
It's what I shared earlier. Bring them into the process, make them part of it. Initially, I think you will find resistance, but make sure that you schedule those meetings ahead of time. That is key, because I think it's unfair to our business partners when, planning meetings pop up on their calendar. Make sure that you're preparing them for success, which means that you come to the table prepared with anticipated questions, and are helping them and becoming their trusted advisor during the process. So it's more about just collecting the budget or the forecast. It's about advising them. It's about pressure testing those key business drivers. Not all business owners even understand what their key business drivers are, but we in finance, we see every single number that comes through the organization. We see everything. So what do we do with that information is key. How do we use that data rich environment that we are fortunate to have access to allow us to enable us to become that trusted advisor and the strategic partner for our business unit owners.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have time for at least a couple more questions. This next question asks, is there a change in skill sets required for hybrid or remote finance teams?
That's a really great question. I think, finance teams, if someone had told me 2.5 years ago that we would be able to close the books remotely, I was a person, I had my binders. I have no binders anymore. Everything is online. So I think there's a lot more pressure that comes, and that we have on, we face in finance, because our business partners are not always readily accessible. We find ourselves working late into the evening hours. We're not balancing our home life as well as we did when we were able to plug in and plug out. So I think our challenges are unique, and I would say that the more you're able to compartmentalize, the more you're able to be planful about your budgeting cycle, set the expectations and follow up, the easier it becomes in a hybrid cycle. And hopefully most of us are a little bit more prepared, and we understand what it takes to be successful in a remote / hybrid working environment.
Great.
I just want to add to that is there is no one situation that's perfect. I think it's unique to every person. I think we all have to remember that.
Great, thank you, Smita. And we have time for one last question. This final question asks, does a company need to be a certain size, such as number of employees, number of departments, number of critical processes, to gain any real benefit versus cost of trying to implement an IBP?
No, I would say if you have a strong S&OP process, I think IBP is an extension of that. And what it does is it allows you to have a more financial line of sight into the next few months, the next quarter. So it's not the size of the company, it's just an extension of taking that S&OP process and using some of the tools that I kind of outlined earlier to build out your integrated business planning. So it's basically inserting your finance function into the S&OP process and extending it out into a fully blown financial forecast.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Sumita, for such an excellent opening keynote. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Sumita.
Thank you, Brittany. Bye.